All right, welcome back. Friday, needless to say, I got the reviews up here. If you want a hard copy, it's the same one that's online. It gives you the date and the time for the exam. Any questions, anything that kind of strikes you as kind of out there, make sure and raise them. We will get through these terms. I'm not going to push it any further than that. I've tried to do a shortened version of U.S. and the Middle East, and it's just confusing to everybody. It's not a topic that you can really kind of condense. So we'll see where we get to by this time next week. But where I was last time was in essence trying to sort of summarize where the United States was in the 1970s, where the origins of the new right comes from. Not only is there a political vacuum on the part of the collapse of the Democrats and the old Republicans, but what you've got are these two new forces of both economic and cultural change that are taking place in the region. And for the most part, what they're going to be focused on are going to be the economic shifts, right? So finance capitalism is an important concept in understanding it. And the best way to kind of summarize finance capitalism is that you are rewarded for owning things as opposed for making things. So if your business makes cars and you turn a profit, you will be taxed on that profit. If your business is buying real estate and improving real estate, those are capital gains, those will not be taxed at the same rate. And while taxation rates are not the most exciting thing, it's rewarding capital for owning capital. That's finance capitalism, and we'll kind of come back to that in just a second. So this loose coalition of national voters are both going to be pulled in this direction of both the organic conservatism, get government out of the way of capital and allow finance capitalism to take control, and cultural conservatism focusing on the 60s, focusing on the counterculture, focusing on the fact that women and people of color and immigrants, etc., are now legally protected as equal citizens due to the Voting Rights and the Civil Rights Act, are going to merge as a political movement during this period of time. And in essence, what we're leading up to is the presidency of Ronald Reagan. But when looking at this, it's really important. And again, Reagan represents, in essence, what the conservatives would call movement culture, right? This idea of an organic culture. They are not cultural conservatives. And so this clip I want to show you is really interesting. This is late in the presidential term for the nomination of the Republican Party in 1980. Two candidates, a Texan, George Herbert Walker Bush, so Daddy Bush, not W, but George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan are the two leading candidates for the Republican presidency. And the last debate they hold is in Houston, Texas. And that's what this YouTube is going to take us to, is this debate. And it's important to recognize kind of what changes in regards to the party. There's some jaw-dropping things here.
Roseburg, I'd like to know, do you think that children of illegal aliens should be allowed to attend Texas public schools free? Or do you think that their parents should pay for their education?
Good question.
We're addressing that too.
I think you're first in this.
Looking right at you. That's the way it was. Look, I'd like to see something done about the illegal alien problem that would be so sensitive and so understanding about labor needs and human needs that problem wouldn't come up. But today, if those people are here, I would reluctantly say I think they would get whatever it is that they're, what the society is giving to their neighbors. But the problem has to be solved. The problem has to be solved because as we've kind of made illegal some kinds of labor that I'd like to see legal, we're doing two things. We're creating a whole society of really honorable, decent, family-loving people that are in violation of the law, and secondly, we're exacerbating relations with Mexico. The answer to your question is much more fundamental than whether they attend Houston schools, it seems to me. I don't want to see if they're living here, I don't want to see a whole, I think it's 6 and 8-year-old kids being made, one totally uneducated and made to feel that they're living outside the law. Let's address ourselves to the fundamentals. These are good people, strong people. Part of my family is a Mexican. I think the time has come that the United States and our neighbors, particularly our neighbor to the south, should have a better understanding and a better relationship than we've ever had. And I think that we haven't been sensitive enough to our size and our power. They have a problem of 40 to 50% unemployment. Now, this cannot continue without the possibility arising with regard to that other country that we talked about, of Cuba and what it is stirring up, of the possibility of trouble below the border, and we could have a very hostile and strange neighbor on our border. Rather than making them, or talking about putting up a fence, why don't we work out some recognition of our mutual problems, make it possible for them to come here legally with a work permit, and then while they're working and earning here, they pay taxes here. And when they want to go back, they can go back, and they can cross and open the border both ways by understanding their problems. This is the only safety valve right now they have with that unemployment that probably keeps the lid from blowing off down there. And I think we could have a fine relationship, and it would solve the problem you mentioned also.
Now, again, the reason why I raise this is to make sure and underscore the fact that the 1980s new right is not the 2020 new right, 2022 new right? It is much more driven by economic issues. Both of these final candidates, Reagan's going to get the nomination, George Herbert Walker Bush is going to become the vice president and future president. Both of them are arguing that the source of illegal immigration is exactly what most people assume it to be, and that is economic instability south of the border. They're coming here for jobs, and the economic opportunity is not available elsewhere, right? And that's not the same as the cultural interpretation that we're going to see largely after 9/11. 9/11 is going to kind of put into the Americans' mind, outsiders are dangerous, outsiders are bad, outsiders are here to harm us. And that is picked up with, obviously, white nationalism, with inherent racism and bigotry, et cetera, to be much different than what we were looking at during the 1980s. So keep that in mind. Right? No doubt that Lincoln wasn't the same kind of Republican today, but so is Ronald Reagan. Reagan would not get the nomination today if he was the same style of politician. All right, where is this new right coming from? Economic is caused by an economy that is now tied to the global economy. We can't control our own economic productivity because we're so connected to the global economy. We were successful in World War II in bringing a lot of competitors along. And what that does is to create a pressure on the United States to be efficient with its use of resources. One of the things that we're not efficient with is our use of hydrocarbons, right? Is that we are a gas-hungry society. And as a result, we have to spend a lot of money for foreign oil to be coming in. That inflates our economy. Same is true for the United States commitment, right or wrong, to a strong military support for global security. So part of the commitment we made following World War II is that we are going to be the world's policeman. That comes at a cost, particularly when Germany and Japan, two of our closest allies, but also two of our economic competitors, are not spending money on that, at least at that point in time. Right? So there's multiple fronts in which this is taking place. One of the key issues is that U.S. labor costs are higher than they are in the developing world. And this is just a reality of living in a developed society. The question that's posed to the United States electorate is, do you address inflation or do you address unemployment? And those are two very different sources. I am old, I'm at the end of my career, my wife and I have invested, retired. We have a lump sum of money that we are planning to retire on. If there's inflation, it'll eat away at that cash that we have got, that money that we have got. So if you have capital, inflation can be dangerous, right? How about you guys? You're just starting out. You're just starting out, right? You have student debt, you have loans, you have the idea of starting a business or going on and getting more education or something like that. Your costs are going to be a part of this in getting a job. Your focus is on employment and employment skills. Those are two very different components. Which one do you focus on? Increasingly what you're going to see is the focus is going to shift to those who have already made it, those who already have money in their pocket, right? You can see that today, right? This focus on inflation. Is that a good thing or bad thing for you guys, right? With fixed income, if you're somebody who's like, I get $1,000 a month and that's all I get and I'm never going to increase, inflation doesn't help because your purchasing power is low. But what does that mean for you guys? If you were to, let's say, buy a house right now at a mortgage, and it's easier to get money as a result of inflation, it is better for you. That's not the narrative you hear on national television. Again, you don't want 20% inflation. You don't want to have to roll in a barrel full of money to buy a gallon of gas. But inherently, that problem is one that affects people with money. Unemployment and employment in general is more interest of people who don't have it. So the priorities are going to be set as we're going to see moving forward. Who gets the attention? And increasingly, the attention is going to be done on those with capital, finance capitalism, not those who are looking for work, all right? So that's one aspect of it. The cultural one, which we'll come back to, is largely a response to the economic changes and the downturns that take place in the 1970s. This notion of liberal social education, radical 60s, etc. If you look and say honestly that the ability for people to have their constitutional rights protected and for their right to vote being ensured are liberal, right? They are equally conservative, and that's exactly what the Great Society does. It has nothing to do, the reason why I tried to draw that distinction has nothing to do with hippies, and pot smoking, and music that is, it's too loud, all that kind of stuff. It's got nothing to do with those cultural values, right? So in essence, the focus is going to be a blowback on an image of the 1960s, which hopefully the lecture I was trying to do was kind of separate that. The same thing is true of these other issues, the weak military. The United States does not have a weak military. We didn't in 1970, we don't in 2020. We have the largest military on the planet. We spend more money on the military than any other country. And these are talking points. These are argumentations that are going to get people riled up. Oh my God, we lost Vietnam. It wasn't because we didn't have bombs. It was because we had no mission there. We had no justifiable reason to be killing people in another country to, in essence, further our own national goals. Federal regulation or choke any regulation, particularly environmental regulation. And increasingly, there's a pushback against one of the things I mentioned about progressivism. Progressivism argues that you can think through a problem, you can use evidence, you can make an evidentiary argument, right? That disappears. And the argument becomes as well, those smart-ass academics being chief amongst them, right? But those smart-ass pencil-neck people in Washington, D.C., and the academy and the university, et cetera, they don't respond with kind of the gut, with the emotion of the American public. So it becomes almost a cultural war against education, against the idea of pragmatism, the idea of testing things. Oh, look, gravity is still working today. Wonderful, wonderful, right? It's a testing phenomenon. Gerald Ford isn't able to strike this balance. Ford is the vice president to Richard Nixon. When Nixon resigns, Ford becomes president of the United States, and one of the first things he does is pardon Richard Nixon of all crimes. So there's no closure to Watergate. No one is going to be held accountable. We're in the same scenario today, right? If you look and see what has taken place, particularly on January 6th, and no one is held accountable, it will happen again, right? It's undeniable. It's human nature. Oh, we will just do it smarter next time. Which means what? Which means effectively a political coup d'etat, right? In a country where you would not think to say that. Where Ford doesn't have that kind of credibility, Ronald Reagan does. Reagan is emerging as the spokesperson for this new conservatism. Notice in this is in 1976, so he's not presidential nominee or whatever. He's focusing on all of these issues of economic efficiencies, right? The independent forces that have brought us the problem. Congress, bureaucracy, lobbyists, big businesses, and big labor. Right? So Reagan himself is talking about an infrastructure of an industrial capitalist society. One built by the Great Depression and the New Deal and the Great Society that no longer holds sway in terms of the economic reality, right? And I keep coming back to, is this the source of the problem, right? Is that the lack, or is it globalization? Is it too much reliance on fossil fuels? Is it America's economic system, which is in essence inefficient, as opposed to the ways in which the United States runs itself? Reagan does not get the nomination. Gerald Ford does from the Republicans. And this guy, the governor from Georgia, Jimmy Carter, is going to get the nominations from the Democrats. In 1976, I would argue, the Democrats could have run a train, could have run whatever, Bozo the Clown, and probably won. In large part because of the reaction against Nixon, against the reaction against Watergate. Carter was an outsider. He was not from the traditional Washington inside the Beltway kind of folks. He's ex-military, so he's a Navy guy. He's a born-again Christian and evangelical. He is an arch-conservative as a Democrat, right? And he is also going to say very forcefully that he is not linked to the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C. In many regards, he's going to run against his own political party. And when the election takes place in 1976, it's the last time you're going to see the Republican or the Democratic South, right? So Carter is going to Why does Jimmy Carter become president? Because of the Old South, because of the southern states are going to vote for it. And why are these southern states voting for him? He's a southerner, but also his kind of credibility as an outsider, somebody who does not see himself as part of Washington, D.C. He's also going to kind of famously be sort of the first president to go out and really campaign on his own religious interpretations. He is an evangelical Christian, convert someone else Christian. If you know anything at all about Carter after the presidency, he's just a phenomenal human being in terms of the way in which he gives back, right? Either Homes Habitat for Humanity or whatnot. So he lives the talk, but he is putting it on his sleeve. He is making that a part of who he is. What you can see is there's no mandate here. There's no. When we get to 4 years later, there's going to be a political mandate, and it's going to be really crystal clear. Carter's political style running against Washington is ironic because the Democrats still control Congress. And so he comes into Congress and he has a Democratic House, he has a Democratic Senate, and he's going to run against them. He is in essence going to make the argument that these individuals, his own political party, are the source of the problem of his own presidential administration. Where Lyndon Johnson was this sort of masterful politician, knew how to use power, Carter is the reverse. His greatest kind of weakness was not his ineffectualness or whatever. He couldn't get things passed. He couldn't do things in Washington. And you have to know how the system works to be able to get legislation passed. In many regards, the same is true of the last two presidents, where you have an outsider who doesn't know how to get legislation passed, hence you get executive orders, and an insider like Biden who does and is able to at least understand how the process of negotiation is going to unfold. Carter takes somewhat of a judgmental view of society, and as a result, there's always this tension between Carter as president and Carter as Sunday school teacher, right? And so when you hear him, there's always this sort of overtone of moral judgment. And yet at the same time, he's not willing to spend his political capital. He is the first, not the first, but one of the first administrations who is going to invest heavily into polling data. It's always been around, but really lean into, before you state a position, you have to check to see what your polling data is going to show. That's not leadership, that's following, right? That's what does everybody like? And I'm gonna, it looks like we're all gonna have vanilla ice cream, right? Because no one's opposed to it. He doesn't have a powerful kind of stake of what his presidency is hoping to accomplish. It is overwhelmingly conservative, and the irony is that Carter's 4 years in office are far more conservative than George Herbert Walker Bush, the Republican who's going to follow Ronald Reagan. Republican George Herbert Walker Bush is going to be more liberal than the Democrat Jimmy Carter. How do you see this? Well, you see this in multiple fashions in terms of the ways in which he is going to cut taxes for businesses, the ways in which he is going to focus on inflation, those with money, not unemployment, those who are trying to get established in American society economically. He's going to cut a lot of the New Deal, Great Society kinds of program, and spend a lot more money on the military budget. Right? So this is a guy who is not in any way, shape, or form kind of going back to the 60s. This is not a 60s president. They're often referred to kind of derogatorily as neoliberalism. Bill Clinton is kind of the same way, of sort of a conservative liberal. And then, given that the conversation we've had about liberalism and conservatism, you can see how the two can kind of cross-pollinate. It's not an oxymoron. It's not impossible to do that. Carter had a fairly good record on foreign policy early in his term. And he is, in essence, remember, again, we're kind of building off of Vietnam, the collapse in Vietnam, the knowledge we now have of the CIA's involvement globally. Carter owns that, and he is going to say the United States is better than simply doing these things and backing dictators around the globe. Somoza in Nicaragua, and in the Philippines, and in Vietnam, and in Iran, and et cetera. And he ties, in essence, American foreign policy to human rights. The idea that the United States stands for the four freedoms, right? That the idea that every human being has natural, God-given, creator-given rights. And the United States is willing to stand with those countries who are trying to do that. He returns the Panama Canal to Panama. That's awful nice. You know, we were supposed to keep it there. He's going to continue the nuclear talks that Nixon is going to start. And throughout his administration, the one thing you can say, which is pretty rare, right? First time since Herbert Hoover, There is no offensive military capability. He didn't order American troops into harm's way for reasons that are complicated, but also kind of respect or reflect the way in which he is going to see his own administration. You know, for whatever perspective you can say, Jimmy Carter is not the Richard Nixon divider that we saw before. He's not a leader. He doesn't have the John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, whatever, Eisenhower leadership qualities. But he certainly is not continuing this feeling that you've got this power structure that is corrupt and is connected to that. The high point of the Carter administration's accomplishment is going to get a peace deal between the first Arab country to recognize the state of Israel, Egypt, and the state of Israel itself. Again, if we had time to talk about U.S. in the Middle East, the United States is seen as an honest broker. We have allies on both sides of the issue. And what Carter is willing to do is to bring these two leaders together, both of whom get huge amounts today and then, huge amounts of assistance from the United States, and to say, we're not asking to resolve this, we're trying to create a framework. And the framework says, this is Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, that Israel has a right to exist. We don't know what it looks like, we don't know what its territory is, but it has a right to exist. And Israel, by contrast, is going to say, we're not going to use military means to continue to expand our influence in the region. This framework for peace is from 1979. Gets extended a little bit under Clinton, the Oslo Accords, but for the most part is left on the shelf by every American president, right? So it is stagnant, but it has started at least under Jimmy Carter. If you're willing to give John Kennedy credit that the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis is an indication of a president learning on the job, then the same thing is true with Jimmy Carter. Is his ability to negotiate this very difficult issue and to get something where the United States is seen in the region as trying to strike a middle ground. We're trying to be respectful of the Arabs, we're trying to be respectful of the Israelis. There is a way to negotiate this, and the United States is willing to take that role. Right? All of these are relatively, they're important, but they're relatively obscured politically by late in his career. The last 2 years of his presidency, what you see is a continuation of these negative practices, right? As a result of Camp David, Iran and Saudi Arabia are both going to embargo oil. Oil prices shoot through the roof, again, triple. The Soviets invade Afghanistan. Carter's response, not to do anything, again, here we are with Ukraine. Our response today is much more forceful for different reasons in terms of location. Carter's response is, well, we're not going to send American athletes to the Olympics that are being held in Moscow. Pretty anemic, right? Oh no, we won't get the Roman Greco, wrestling medal or what have you. There's obviously activity in Central and South America that is threatening in terms of the Nicaragua situation. Inflation, again, we're at 4% inflation. And what do you see in the newspaper? That's there in the newspapers, on television and whatnot. Inflation, inflation, inflation. Unemployment is for those who are trying to get themselves out of a hole. Right? Inflation is for those who already have it. Carter himself is going to be challenged by his own Democratic Party. Again, the Kennedy name, and Edward Kennedy is the third brother. Obviously, Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy are both dead by this point in time. That Teddy Kennedy is going to run for president against his own sitting president. So it's as if, who knows what's happened. Well, I mean, it's as if last time if someone challenged Donald Trump for the Republican nomination, or Obama for the Democratic nomination in 2012, right? Carter does not appear as if he has got an answer for this, and going into the 1980 election, what you see is that, in essence, Carter is going to be beset by these issues where the United States does not have a plausible policy. Two foreign policy issues are going to dominate. One of them comes later, and that it actually physically comes after the fact, and that's Afghanistan. Afghanistan in 1978 is a puppet state for the Soviet Union. The religious, radical, conservative movement in Afghanistan is going to overthrow the Soviet puppet state, and the Soviets are going to invade. And the question is what are we going to do as a nation? What we're going to do is we're going to back what is called the Mujahideen, the holy warriors. Again, if we had more time and talked about the U.S. and the Middle East, there are two main religious sects of Islam. Just like in Christianity, there's Catholicism and Protestantism. In Islam, there's Sunniism and Shia. And these are mostly Sunni, mostly Saudi Arabian-backed religious warriors. They are going to, with our arms and with Saudi Arabian money, going to make the situation so untenable for the Soviet Union that by 1985, they're forced to withdraw. This quote here is by Carter's national security advisor. The Soviets bleed as much and for as long as possible. The argument is the enemy of my enemy, right? Well, Osama bin Laden is not in this picture. He is in Afghanistan fighting this war, being funded by the United States. And just as an FYI, moving forward, when Saddam Hussein invades in 1991, when Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait and threatens the holiest Shia or Sunni city in the world, which is Mecca, who do the Saudis call for to help them out? They don't call these mujahideen, they call the United States. The United States comes in and cleans out Saddam Hussein's control over Kuwait. That is what's going to set off Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, these men who are religiously motivated, are looking and saying, when the chips are down, when they really need someone to fight for Islam, who do the leaders of Saudi Arabia call on? They call on the secular United States of America. And the only way to prevent that from happening is to attack the United States itself. So the roots of 9/11 are already being kind of spreading out as a result of this policy. We don't see this in the United States, right? We love seeing, dead Soviets. All right, yeah, they're killing our enemy, right? Enemy of my enemy. Because 1 month earlier, what you have are 55 American diplomats taken hostage in Iran. Again, Carter, in retrospect, handled the situation poorly. He did not believe that these religious kind of clerics who were in charge would have the influence over the state that they are going to. They're going to be responding to the Iranian population. A lot of these are college students, by the way. Are going to be responding to what? To what I never learned in school, and you probably didn't until you took a college course, and that is that the United States has long had an active role in keeping the king of Iran in charge and with a repressive regime. They see us as a linchpin in the region. Carter is going to be kind of held hostage along with these individuals politically. He's trying to negotiate his way out, and throughout this period of time, what you see is that the Carter administration appears less and less capable of exerting force. Into this comes the 1980 election, so 4 years later. So Carter's presidency is hard to evaluate because what you see is not much change because he is sort of in between two. He's a Democrat with Republican policies, and he's not pushing very hard for those Republican policies. He is going to run against a Republican in Ronald Reagan, who's going to have a very clear and very direct campaign question. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And the answer, objectively, is no. Economically, in terms of the world, in terms of the ways in which you are going to be seen as a trusted partner. Even with this, when you look at the numbers of voters, what you see for the first time in American history is a decline in those voting populations who are traditionally liberal or Democratic leaning, right? People of color, poor and urban, numbers drop. Young people, numbers drop. If you were to run the numbers today with the same demographics that we have today, Carter wins this election. As you can see, he is not going to win this election. Carter's from Georgia, he wins Georgia. His vice president is from Minnesota, they win Minnesota. I think this is Maryland and West Virginia, who knows what's going on with that, right? And what it leaves us with is a clear political victory, right? A clear, you can't get much clearer than that, right? And Reagan's re-election is going to be very much the same 4 years later. Who is this guy, Ronald Reagan, right? So if I can figure out how to do it, I think I can. Document camera. Oh, look at that. Oh, blocking the texture. These are images I took with what's called a camera, right? Everyone's got their phone, right? But they literally, I was on a research trip in Washington, D.C. I was doing a book on automobiles, and I was at the Library of Congress doing research. Reagan dies, right? President of the United States dies. And I was there when Reagan's funeral case on, and you can see here, there's the body, and he's being walked down here. I'm standing, if you've been in Washington, D.C., you can see the Washington Monument. Right behind me is the White House. So if you know that area, it's really pretty amazing. I'm always drawn to this picture right here that's kind of symbolic. His boots are in backwards. Those are Reagan's boots in a horse's stirrup. So he is a fallen ex-commander. When I was there, so this was Wednesday, I believe. I'd been there all week. My family, my wife and 2 kids who were pretty young at the time. So this is 2004. So they were less than 10. Came up and we kind of did a family vacation on it. And so there, my wife gets up, the kids are there, we got a hotel room, and what's taking place, reason I'll get to the point of the story, is that there's going to be a public viewing of the casket, etc., under the Capitol, right? So the big rotunda and it's sitting there, and it's quite stunning and symbolic and the rest. And I said to my wife, when we're in town, let's go there. So the kids were falling asleep. We were like, okay, they're out, we can leave. We go down to the mall, the big area between the Lincoln Memorial and the Capitol building. Again, if you've ever been there, you know how big it is. It's huge, right? It's the size of this campus. It is completely 100% filled with people waiting to do this, right? So all sections from the Washington Monument to the Capitol building are filled with people. We get out of our cab and the cops are standing there saying, ma'am, sir, they're taking the body away tomorrow to get buried at 10 o'clock. It was only going to be lying in state for less than a day. There's no way you're getting through this line. No one is going to be at this point in time get through this line. And my wife and I are like, well, we did just abandon our kids. So we walk around and kind of soaked in the air. This is with my eyes, right? This is what I saw. The cab behind us. Out comes a woman who was probably younger than me now, but seemed old at the time, right? Gets out, she's got a walker. She's walking, and she's doing this, and they're going, ma'am, you will not be walking. Ma'am, you're not going to be able to. She didn't flip on the bird, but effectively said that as much, right? I guarantee you she got up and got through that line, right? Why do I say this story? Because the response of the United States to someone like Ronald Reagan is as powerful as it was. It's as close as you're going to come to understanding the power that Franklin Roosevelt had over the United States in the 1930s. It's the same sort of bond. So if you have older family members who can remember Ronald Reagan and ask them about him, right? It's the same component. Why do Republicans hate Franklin Roosevelt? Because of the amount of love that was shown to him by the American public. The same is true in reverse. And I say that with 2 opportunities to vote for Ronald Reagan, I never voted for him. If he was running tomorrow, I wouldn't vote for him for policy reasons, not because I dislike him, right? But it says something about what Reagan represented. He is a significant political figure, but what he represented was a shift towards economic conservatism, not cultural. You saw the clip, right? Don't build a wall, for God's sakes. I mean, it's almost it almost beggars the mind to see how much the political parties are going to change over this time. So he's the first president to be born in Mexico. No, it's not true. Tampico, Illinois. Tampico, Mexico, right? The United States takes all the coolest names in Mexico in terms of, I'm sure there's probably a Tijuana, Oklahoma somewhere, who knows. Downstate Illinois, grown up in Chicago. His father, again, this sounds familiar. It's almost kind of like what's going on here. His father was by all accounts a really liked guy, gregarious, fun guy to be around, but also a raging alcoholic. Reagan recalled having to pull his dad out of the bushes in the morning when he was leaving for school. His friends were walking by, and there's Dad passed out in a drunken stupor in the front. His mother is distant, not warm, but also very devout. And he's raised in this environment of sort of coldness and alienation. He is not someone who is going to have a lot of close friends. Sounds a lot like Nixon, right? Sounds a lot like character becomes a question. By contrast, Reagan likes people. He enjoys company of people. Every one of us knows people like this, and in fact, probably some of you are this person, where you're friends with a lot of people, but not close to many people. People like to be around you. He's smart enough to do well enough in school. He goes to college. He goes to Eureka College in Southern Illinois, right? Nixon went to, where did Nixon go? I forgot the name of his school. Regardless, both of them combined are smaller than TAMO-CC, right? They're not coming from elite institutions. And while he's there, he's a drama major. He's good at sports. He's athletic. He likes playing football, but he's particularly good at swimming. And he's a lifeguard in the region, which and recorded almost 77 saves as a result of that. He's liked by everybody, but he is not close to people. Again, It sounds a lot like Franklin Roosevelt. Obviously, Franklin Roosevelt comes from wealth. He majors in theater, and he gets a job almost immediately broadcasting Cubs games in Iowa, right? So what he would be doing, because he didn't have television yet, is he'd be reading from the ticker tape, and he would dramatize them, right? And so he said one time, famously, the ticker tape would be coming across, and all of a sudden the line cut out. What do you do? Well, it's baseball. And he's like, and he fouled off, and he fouled off. He said he had 12 foul balls in a row before they got the ticker tape back on and they knew what was going on. Reagan, when he was president, flew back. My wife and I were living in Wrigleyville, so literally 2 blocks from Wrigley Field. And he comes and lands his presidential helicopter in the middle of Wrigley Field and announces a Cubs game with Harry Carey, right, while president of the United States. With the Cubs, he's going to travel to spring training. It's in Arizona. While he is there, he is going to sign a very constricted, he's not wealthy as a result of it, deal with Warner Brothers Pictures. Warner Brothers is the left-leaning, studio in Hollywood. They make movies about working-class people. They're much, they're not seen as sort of the elite, highbrow types of movie makers, and he is going to make a name for himself in Hollywood as sort of the leading, not the leading man, but the friend of the leading man. So he's not the lead character, but he's the one who is going to, sort of be there. Definitely not the top billed actor. His stardom had not really established himself, but he had established a pretty good reputation. He gets divorced twice in the 30s. Oh my God, divorce, right? He votes for Franklin Roosevelt 4 times. He's an active New Dealer. He's a labor leader, for God's sakes. Again, just try and put this person in 2022 Republican politics, and you can begin to see how poorly this individual would fare, however you want to kind of frame him. And it's this individual who is going to, in large part, World War II is going to upend his career. He is emerging as a potential lead actor. World War II breaks out and he commits himself to the war effort. Again, irony. History loves irony. John Wayne, who's often seen as the tough guy, John Wayne does not participate in World War II. John Wayne is John Wayne because he's the only really major male actor around in Hollywood to make these movies. Right? So he doesn't put his career on hold as a result of World War II and becomes a superstar. Ronald Reagan does put his career on hold because of World War II, and as an actor, he's forgotten. Right? So in a sense, what you've got here is a typical, American dream, American success story. He's made money, he's successful, he's divorced, he's whatever. How does he become a politician? Well, it's here where Reagan's kind of post Hollywood career begins to absorb. Reagan is not an intellectual, he's not stupid, right? But he's not somebody who is going to be book learned and sit around and study white papers and all the rest of that stuff. But he's going to pick up his values from what he knows. And one of the first things that he knows is he's going to become the leader of the Screen Actors Guild. He's a labor leader, and he's going to see corruption inside the Hollywood, mostly from organized crime, right? So mafiosos and whatnot. Seeing The Godfather, there's a reason why there's mafioso in Godfather 1. Spoiler alert, right? Don't get too attached to the horse, right? But it's here where he is going to begin to see these sort of internal influences, internal enemies. I mentioned he is going to be a friendly witness to the House Un-American Activities Committee. He's not talking about communists. He's talking about, Vito Corleone. He's talking about the influence of money and power within the industry itself. He is going to, as a result of his career kind of collapsing, he's going to make the move to television. Today, there's a lot of prestige television. In the 50s, if you were an actor who showed up on television, your career was effectively over in film. GE, General Electric, has a weekly show, and he is going to introduce and act as the host of that show. So once a week, this is back in the day, right, where there are 3 TV channels, once a week, you would turn on the TV and there would be Ronald Reagan introducing a story that was going to be dramatized and be the kind of spokesperson for that. Part of that job was going around and being corporate spokesman for General Electric. He didn't go do his own research, write his own papers, etc. They handed him a script. And what does the script say? These businesses are being overregulated. There's too much big New Deal, Great Society, there's too much involvement by the federal government in our businesses. That's going to become part of this political ideology. He's going to make a name for himself politically in 1964. And I mentioned this. Barry Goldwater, a very strongly conservative. What I mean by this is that he is an organic conservative. Again, not worried about voting rights or anything like that, civil rights, but worried about, in essence, the organic conservative ideals of an intrusive government. Most Republicans in the 1960s are going to run away from Barry Goldwater. Reagan is going to be a featured speaker at the Republican National Convention in favor of Barry Goldwater. And what he does is not scare people by talking about winnable nuclear wars, but about that sort of organic conservatism. This is what the United States is founded on: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That the United States shouldn't get in the way of opportunity. And it's going to make a name for himself in the Republican Party. They are going to fund him and fund his run for governor of California in 1966, which he is going to win. Full stop. What's going on in the United States? It's about as left-leaning a country as you're going to get in the 20th century. Maybe the 1930s is a little bit more. And Ronald Reagan, a conservative, is going to win the governorship and then re-win it 4 years later of the entire state of California. Right? He is a political force, but he is not seen that way because, in large part, he's an actor. Right? He's a former TV star. That sound familiar? Right? Someone who has just got the eye of the American public. He runs as governor, runs for president in 1968, and didn't stand a chance. It was just it was poorly run. He runs in 76 and comes second to Gerald Ford. At that convention, it's very clear that the momentum is for Ronald Reagan. The public in the assembly are cheering the loudest for Ronald Reagan's movement. He does not get the nomination, but it's here where Reagan sort of puts the last finishing touches onto his image as a Cold Warrior, right, of fighting the Soviet Union and that they're evil. Again, war on evil, war on drugs, war on war on bad feelings, war on sunny day. I mean, it's like these war on emotions that kind of enters into the political stream. And more importantly, he is going to be seeing himself as this individual who's running to rescue the United States, just like he was as a lifeguard, just as he was as sort of the image that he had of his own role in his family, right? He's playing off the insecurities, and particularly Carter's sort of middle-of-the-road, milquetoast, what do you stand for, Mr. President? What are you willing to go to the wall for? I don't know. There's not much. And it goes to that aphorism in American society: lead, follower, get out of the way. Right? And Reagan is saying, here's where I'm going. And what do you got to lose? What do you got to lose if where I'm going is incorrect? Right? That message is a powerful one. And particularly when you've got a United States which is sort of in this crisis of confidence that is going to be the 1970s. He wins in an electoral landslide. So the message and the messenger are going to run parallel in a strong way. Reagan's ability to communicate, he was called the great communicator, stems from his experience as an actor. Right? This is his first speech. He has just taken the oath of office, puts his hand on the Bible. I solemnly swear to uphold the Constitution, yada, yada, so help me God. Right? His first speech as President Ronald Reagan is this one. And he is going to see this as an opportunity to establish himself as, a leader. Meaning what? Meaning he's practiced this over and over and over again. And he was a master at being able to find places within his speeches to kind of choke up a little bit, right? Now, that's not a natural reaction, but it is an effective one. It's acting. It's showing to the American public, here's the things that I really care about. Reagan was a master at that, right? And if you see any of his, his speeches or clips or something, usually what you see is a very old man. You see a guy on the decline. He's early onset with Alzheimer's by the time he leaves office in 1988. But this is Reagan in 1980. And you really see a par performance of somebody who is communicating, expressing the feelings that the American public have. The key thing to note, I've shown you speeches from Kennedy, I've shown you what Johnson is talking about. What Johnson and Kennedy, a great society, a new frontier, what they're arguing is that we have the opportunity as a group to be successful. We have an opportunity as a society to do things that are difficult. What Reagan's going to do is going to say, we have an obligation to allow individuals to do that. Forget about society. Who cares about the people living next door, right? This is for you, right? And so it's an important shift in tone in terms of, you know, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. It's almost a reverse of that. So again, notice how effective he is as a spokesperson.
All of us need to be reminded that the federal government did not create the states. The states created the federal government. Now, so there will be no misunderstanding, it's not my intention to do away with government. It is rather to make it work. Work with us, not over us. To stand by our side, not ride on our back. Government can and must provide opportunity, not smother it. Foster productivity, not stifle it. If we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to a greater extent than has ever been done before. Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth.
Here's where it gets.
The price for this freedom at times has been high, but we have never been unwilling to pay that price. It is no coincidence that our present troubles parallel and are proportionate to the intervention and intrusion in our lives that result from unnecessary and excessive growth of government. It is time for us to realize that we're too great a nation to limit ourselves to small dreams. We're not, as some would have us believe, doomed to an inevitable decline. I do not believe in a fate that will fall on us no matter what we do. I do believe in a fate that will fall on us if we do nothing. So with all the creative energy at our command, let us begin an era of national renewal. Let us renew our determination, our courage, and our strength. And let us renew our faith and our hope. We have every right to dream heroic dreams. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. You can see heroes every day going in and out of factory gates. Others, a handful in number, produce enough food to feed all of us and then the world beyond. You meet heroes across a counter, and they're on both sides of that counter. There are entrepreneurs with faith in themselves and faith in an idea who create new jobs, new wealth, and opportunity. There are individuals and families who take taxes, support the government, and whose voluntary gifts support church, charity, culture, art, and education. Their patriotism is quiet but deep. Their values sustain our national life. Now, I have used the words they and their in speaking of these heroes. I could say you and your, because I'm addressing the heroes of whom I speak, you, the citizens of this blessed land. Your dreams, your hopes, your goals are going to be the dreams, the hopes, and the goals of this administration, so help me God.
So effective, right? I mean, he's a really great communicator. The name comes. Why is he so effective? Because he's dealing with these emotional issues. He's dealing with the ways in which we kind of see ourselves as a country, even from World War II, of having an idealistic view of individualism, personal rights, etc. And the question is as we're going to get to on Monday, what are his policies? What kind of policies is he going to pass? And they certainly will be policies that are focused on economics, not culture. But that distinction is going to be important. All right, we'll call it there, and I'll see you guys on Monday. Have a good weekend.